Some of you may remember the video I made about this Cummins N14 dropping a valve. Well, that was just the first part to this story. Today I intend to complete the story, which lasted the better part of 2018. So we're headed into the old storage trailer here in order to unearth some evidence from the root causes of this problem. So the first time it dropped a valve, we were all thinking, well, it's an old head. The engine's got over 900,000 miles on it since the last rebuild. So, you know, it can happen to any engine. And I will be linking that video below. This video is not going to be about that. I had some pre-recorded stuff from the next occurrence, which I'll be detailing here in just a second. So it was about 25,000 miles after that first head being changed. I was headed down the Interstate 10 westbound. Wasn't working her too hard, maybe 67 miles an hour. Of course, that area is all uphill. It's coming into Van Horn, Texas, or towards that area. When all of a sudden I heard a noise, it was kind of maybe a ting 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 kind of sound. It almost sounded like the fan was touching the fan shrouds somewhere. So, you know, that's weird. I thought, well, maybe it's the AC fan. So I turned that off, and no, it still made the same sound. And I took the truck out of gear. I was headed down a hill at this point and revved the engine a couple times, and sure enough, it's changing with the RPM of the engine. So I decide, you know what, I'm going to have to, pull over here. But right now I'm going down a hill. I'm actually accelerating 70. I was into the 70s at that point, and so I just took it out of gear because it would be quiet then. You couldn't hear it. And all of a sudden, then it really went south, and it ka-chunk, and the bottom of the valve actually dropped off. And you could see in the stack mirror that it was blowing smoke and all kinds of other stuff. So I just turned the key off. And at this point, I'm doing on the other side of 75 miles an hour headed down this hill. Oh, crap, what am I going to do? Thankfully, I once again knew where I was and noticed a truck stop there. The first one coming in towards Van Horn. They're on the right-hand side, on the north side of the interstate. Yeah. And I managed, with the engine off, no power steering. I actually had to touch the brakes a few times to keep it under 80 miles an hour. Well, maybe not quite that bad, maybe 77, but I managed to pull into the truck stop and roll into a parking spot. Their yard was, their parking lot was actually sloped a little bit. I rolled into a parking spot and once again had to haul the truck home, swapped the tractor out, and quickly went and dropped the load. This is most unusual from the people I've talked with, done warranty work for a long time. They said this is, usually Cummins heads are really great. They last, and you don't have to, well, I shouldn't say you don't have to, but usually they don't have issue. You can see it's beat up quite a bit more than the previous time. Not to mention it failed in two places. Of course, it took out all kinds of other parts. Of course, we have the turbo sitting here with the housing off. Hopefully you can see how the fins have been messed up. It's not messed up as bad as the previous turbo. And I decided we're going to change the piston because it does not look so sharp anymore. Here's the piston skirt. It is cracked, but I don't see how that could have contributed to this failure. It still had to stay in its position where it was. Now, we were thinking perhaps maybe the piston failed, came up and hit the head, and that caused the failure, but that's not the case because the, I'm not sure if you call this piston crown, that may be just the top, but this upper part of the piston, the steel part of the piston, is intact. Of course, it's roughed up here, but structurally it's still okay. Of course, here we have the rod with that beefy wrist pin. This is the first time I've seen this engine, or an N-series engine like this apart, N14 more specifically. Of course, here you have the injector. The injector tip actually we found in the turbo, as well as this piece of valve. Not to mention here you have the rocker arm, and you can see the adjusting screw also broke. And of course there's bearings and whatnot. And here's the liner. It's right in front of your face, but yeah, here's the liner. It didn't seem to really sustain any more damage since last time. So like you can see, we got it all out. Of course, I'm going to be putting in a new cylinder kit and new turbo, new push rod, new injector and rocker arm, head. I may have already said that. So we're back. I went to Cummins and got the parts. You can see the new cylinder head there. Actually, I've been there twice now because of the old head, or not the old head, but the previous head that they gave me actually was the wrong one. They had it in the wrong box. So I actually had to go back and get the proper head. I'll show you a picture of the other one. It's unusual. Haven't seen something like that before, and other people I've talked to say it also looks very, very strange to them. Here's a piston. I've already got the rings on it. And of course here's the connecting rod, not that that's new or anything, as well with the cap and new bearings, so that's important. Yeah, I'm gonna be focusing a little bit more on the bottom end parts and make this a little quicker, because let's face it, I've done the top end so many times, it's getting old. So yeah, bottom end. So speaking of bottom end, here we are underneath the truck. Looking at the crank and the connecting rods and pistons and piston cooling nozzles and the camshaft and cam followers and all that fun stuff that you can see from down here, including the new cylinder liner we just installed not long ago. I really should have done a record of the block with the cylinder out, or the liner out, but heck, I don't have a huge amount of time to record and whatnot, so I need to get this thing put together, and there's probably some wind noise there. And there we have it. The piston connecting rod are in place and torqued up and ready to go. Now I just need to put the pan on and then start working on the top end again. So after that second occurrence, and once I got everything put back together, you know, I was thinking, well, Cummins must have just had a defective part. I mean, it can happen. And I mean, they're not made in the USA anymore. You know, this stuff happens, right? And that feeling was reinforced by the fact that about 4,600 miles later, the back of that head actually shot out freeze plug. This one right here on the back of the head. Thankfully, it wasn't one of these or anything else. But thankfully, when that happened, I was close to town. I was just leaving after unloading, and I recognized the symptoms of not having enough coolant. Thanks to when that one head had a bad injector cup. I think it was the middle one here. And it ended up taking out the water pump seal. So that was fun. And it was only, once again, 4,600 miles after that head was changed. So about 23,000 miles after I had installed the second head, I was headed down the road. It was a little bit before midnight, headed eastbound on the Highway 60 coming into Canyon, Texas. It's near Amarillo. And I was going to shut down there in Amarillo. When all of a sudden going down the road there, I was bound for Nebraska. I was going down the road and suddenly I hear that same tick, 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 tick sound. And I knew what this was. I took it right out of gear, revved the engine to make sure that the sound did in fact change with engine RPM. That was the case, and I just killed it right there. Turned the key off, and I was rolling. So, okay, where am I? I looked out the windshield, which of course you can't right now, and saw that there was a flashing yellow light. Well, what's that? Oh, well, that's the only stoplight, or the first stoplight coming into Canyon there. Okay, I knew where I was. I knew there were service roads here. Turned on my high beams and was able to see that off to the right-hand side where there was a crossover. So I turned off onto the service road. Once again, no power steering. And right there was a little turn off, some gravel where you see trucks have been parking. So I just parked right there on the gravel, and I put out the triangles, went to bed. Next morning, pulled the jake off to make sure what I thought happened did in fact happen. So pulled the jake off, and that was the case. You could wiggle the top of that, the top of the valve, I guess where the valve retainers are, back and forth independently. So I got the truck towed home once again, and once again I heard it in time to where the head and the piston were basically unscathed, because only the top of that valve had actually broken off, and the valve was just sliding and its guide touching the piston being pushed back upwards. And here's that valve. As you can see, it broke off right at the top near the retainers, and once again I was lucky because I had another head, and somewhere in this stack of heads, the one that had a bad injector cup. Just pulled the valves out of that, took it to the mechanic who had that valve compressor, the spring compressor, put in those valves, and once again, the feeling of, well, you know, it's a Cummins defective head, they're not made in the USA anymore, or the quality has just gone down, was reinforced because of that freeze plug shut out. And when this mechanic took out these valves, and he put in the valves from the head that was an old head, had a bad injector cup, he was telling me that those valves actually look better than these. One's fresh out of a remanufactured head, you know, 23,000 miles ago or whatever. And I was thinking, well, you know, it's just another, you know, factory defect, whatever. And so with those new valves, I put everything back together, and I headed off to Nebraska and made that run. So now we've got the used valves in the head, and off to the races we went. I was then headed, it was about, I think right at 8,000 miles later, I was headed eastbound, going to go over Guadalupe Pass empty, and I just hit the steep part, and all of a sudden I just hear thunk. You didn't hear the bang bang crunch 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 crunching up the valve. Any of that. It just was running on 5 cylinders, and well, that's weird. So I managed, it was just that first little stretch, there was a little gap in the guardrail, and I pulled off to the side and listened to it a little bit, put it in first gear and let the clutch out just a little bit, or low gear, whatever, and yeah, I was running on 5 cylinders. Okay, well, you know, maybe we just dropped a push rod, who knows. So I killed it, went to bed. Next morning, pulled the Jake off again. Sure enough, same story, dropped a valve, so had the truck towed home. That's some kinds of funky light going on there. Had the truck hauled home, trailer towed back, and then we actually dug into it and looked for the root cause of the problem. So once we went to pull it apart, we were out to find the root cause. And here you can see what the cause actually was. Look at that cam lobe. That certainly does not look so hot. There was a lot of talk about camshafts. But, you know, someone was saying, you know, those Chevy 350s back in the day, they wipe cams all the time, and then the valves just wouldn't open. You know, if this were the case, if it was the cam, you'd then, all those Chevys would have been dropping valves left and right? So, pull it apart again and pulled off the old cam follower. This is what we found. And I mean, it really sucks because when we changed the cylinder kit, I have video and some pictures with the cylinder out of that screwed up cam follower roller and the screwed up camshaft. So if I would have been paying more attention, would have tried to find and fix the root cause of the problem instead of just treating the symptoms, I would have had a lot less hassle. So we changed the camshaft, put 3 new cam followers on it, and new head on the back, of course, and I mean, it just kind of ran fine. So once we got everything put back together, it just ran fine. Now, I guess the moral of this story is always try and find the root cause of the problem. And that's something I'm pretty bad about. You know, you hear a ticking noise, and it kind of did this the whole time. It made this tick, 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 tick. It changed with engine RPM. I mean, what are you going to do? How are you going to find what that problem actually is, and if it's even going to be, if it's even going to cause problems like this? I guess the moral of the story is just try and find the root cause of the problem instead of just, you know, fixing the downstream consequences of that problem. And I certainly paid for it. It would have been a lot cheaper because I was thinking, you know, maybe I should pull that cam follower off. But I mean, there you have it. You know, I did want to kind of do something snazzy, you know, N14 2018 rewind or something like that. It's about a year late now. We're coming up on Christmas 2019. But what had happened in 2018, I don't have other parts here, but I did have a couple of injectors go. One of them just kind of slowly got worse and worse. And if you really got on the fuel hard, it would come back to life until you let off the throttle again, and it would die. And the other one just quit altogether. Right on a run, going to Utah. The very few times I get to go to Utah, I was running on 5 cylinders, trying to baby it, not put my foot to the floor. I did the math, and I was making like 350 to 400 horse. And I mean, man, you're trying to make time, run 80 miles an hour on the interstate, and it's all uphill, you know. So, I mean, that was a rough trip. Thankfully, everything did go okay. If I was really smart, I would have stopped there at the Cummins in Salt Lake. They probably had. I think I made a couple calls, and they had one in stock. Pull in there, put a new injector in. So, you know, on the trip back from, I picked up another load in Idaho coming back down, and that way I would have been running on all 6, but made it happen. And just those 2 injectors, I think that was everything that really happened to that Cummins. I think in there I had a power divider go bad. I think right after I changed the cylinder kit, that first run, power divider went out, and had to lock the thing to get back to the house. That wasn't cool. But that's pretty much sums up what I was trying to go for here. You know, everything that kind of went wrong, what the problems actually were. And I guess once again, always make sure you find the root cause. Don't be afraid to turn that wrench. And I hope you all enjoyed the video. Until next time, have a good one. Postscript. As if I had a script. That should be self-evident, no script. Now, I pulled the old camshaft out to show you guys a couple of things here. If you can see here on the injector lobe, where the actual roller wasn't running, you can see that it appears to actually be blued. And this has kind of got me thinking. You can see it's not exclusively on that that one lobe. It's pretty much continues all the way down the cam to the front end. Now, the reason, well, heck, it's March now. I've been doing some pontificating, and I think I have, you could call it an educated guess what the deal is here. You know, I'll show you the profile, how that cam, that's exhaust lobe is wore off. Beautiful, isn't it? You can see the profile that it made and how the lift was affected. Well, it was, but you can kind of see how that works. The reason I'm doing this is because years ago, some time ago, I did a video. I think it was called A Trip to Idaho. It was the Road series, A Trip to Idaho, something like that. I'll put a link down in the description or up here in the corner, whatever. And on that trip, I was heading on the Interstate 70. There was a short stretch on the I-70 there in Utah where I told a story. I didn't go over the mountain over there west of Greenville. Not Greenville, Green River. I think I hit, what is the Highway 6 going north? No, it was a 191, regardless. And regardless, but I told a story about how years ago this truck had, I think the engine had, it wasn't worn out. It was not exactly freshly rebuilt, but it was a younger rebuild. That was when my dad still owned this truck, and I was actually riding with him at the time. We were headed on up that 191. I'll, move around here so it's not quite so boring. But we were headed up that grade west of Green River, Utah, on the I-70, and at the time the truck had just kind of a crappy 3-row radiator, so it just kept getting hotter and hotter, and it couldn't really keep up with see, that's just oil, but it couldn't keep up with the heat this engine was producing on that day. And Dad was not watching the oil temperature gauge. And eventually on that mountain, it ended up spinning a rod bearing. And from what I've been able to gather, if I recall correctly, if everyone recalls correctly, then this is the same cam that was in that engine. I believe the oil temperature got up to what, 200? No, I think it was close to 300 degrees after the failure actually occurred, and he looked at the oil temperature gauge. Oh no, the oil temperature is too hot. But it blew the motor right there, and of course that was the end of that trip. But there you have it. So my kind of hypothesis is that that this bluing and this dark coloration and whatnot is a result of this camshaft being in the engine with 300 plus degree oil, and the reason that this cam lobe went, and this is just out there, right, was because it's the one all the way in the back, farthest away from the oil pump. Just a thought. But there you have it. I mean, and of course that N14s, from my understanding, running correctly don't have oil temperature problems. This particular instance, the oil thermostat that controls the flow of coolant to the oil cooler was stuck partially closed and was not allowing that coolant to cool off the oil, and it just got hotter and hotter until it failed. So, don't let a $50 part cost you an engine. Watch your oil temperature gauge. But that's my theory of why this whole saga ended up happening, is because this cam was in the engine with excessively hot oil temperatures. Now, the only thing that seems weird to me is that this waited so long to become a real issue, because the engine had, what, 900 plus thousand miles on it since. It blew the motor in Utah, got rebuilt. It had to get a new crank, so it was out of frame. I don't think they decked the block, but that's talk for another day. But this cam stayed in it apparently, and 900 plus thousand miles later is when it started to see problems because of that oil temperature. That's the only thing that sounds strange to me, is why it would continue to operate well for so long until this ticking noise developed and it actually started dropping valves. But that's it. I think we're going to leave you guys here. I appreciate you watching, and hopefully I've been able to shed some light on maybe some issues that you might have been having and tell this story. Until next time, have a good one.